Hi, I'm Katie Wetherbee with Key Ministry.
And I'm Rebecca Hamilton with Key Ministry.
And we are so excited to teach this workshop. We do a lot of workshops around the country for churches, and usually the question that we get asked at the end, after the workshop's been given, is, okay, where do I start? Now that I have all this information, what's the first step that I should take? And so we're hoping that through this workshop today, you'll get some ideas of how to assess your church and your church's readiness for starting an inclusion ministry and what to do when you want to get started. The first thing that we always tell people is to start, end, and every step in between with prayer. That's the most important thing that you can do. We really want to make sure in inclusion ministry, as with any ministry, that our steps are what God wants and our plans line up with exactly what He wants to do.
And that our timing is His timing, and that we really are obedient to Him and how quickly He wants things to progress in our individual churches.
Absolutely. We also talk with folks about building relationships within the church. Many times when someone wants to start an inclusion ministry, it's because of an existing passion that they might have. Perhaps they're a professional in the field of special education, or they might have a child with special needs or know someone with special needs, and they really feel called to it, which is a wonderful way to start. But we also want to remember that other relationships within the church are really important, and this kind of ministry cannot be done alone. So we really encourage people to start building the relationships that they're going to need to sustain their ministry. Once they do that, it's also important to assess the church's culture. Every church is different. Big and small churches function differently. Churches of different denominations function differently, and it's important to take a look at how the church operates so that anyone starting a new ministry can be in line with those existing policies and procedures. So what else would you add to that?
Well, just that we need to have policies to really cover every aspect of our ministry, and that would include how to recruit and train our volunteers, how to have safety policies in place, things to do when behavior goes awry among kids, and it will, regardless of kids being typically developing kids or kids with special needs. So we like to have policies in place to cover all of those things, and we also like to remember to keep things within the regular chain of command, which is different for every church setting.
That's true. That's true. Once someone who's interested in starting ministry has done all of these things and really feels ready and has prayed a lot about where to start, then they really have to look at, okay, what's my starting line? And we've sort of boiled it down to 3 different ways to start this kind of a ministry, because this is what we've seen. People either start with a program, and that often fits in with a larger church, where a lot of the church's functions are program-based. They might be outreach-based, where it's, again, a program, but it's specific to outreach. And then there's that last, oh, well, there's this one child type of situation.
Right. And with the program approach, we find that it's a little more formalized. They might have a key, group of people working together who want to formally develop this program, present it to leadership, have their policies and procedures in place, get those approved. And the second type of model that we see, that outreach approach, is one that includes things like respite events. So if you would like to have a periodic event at your church where you care for kids with special needs while their parents or caregivers go out and have a well-deserved evening away and have trained volunteers at your church to provide this free of charge, that would be an outreach-based kind of
That's your
inclusion.
Favorite,
It is. That is my favorite. I love doing those, and I think it's so fun, and I think it really serves a huge need that is really a felt, perceived need in the community of parents who have kids with special needs. So I like to say it sort of scratches where it really itches, because it's such an underserved group of people. And that last, there's this kid approach, is one that Katie and I have just seen from being in churches so much and talking with them and working through. And sometimes we go in and do a workshop about special needs ministry, and people say, well, we don't really have that here. I mean, we don't really have kids with special needs. And then we do the presentation and talk about kids who have autism and anxiety and ADHD and all of the other kinds of disabilities that we talk about. And then at the end, invariably, someone will raise their hand and go, there's this kid, and they think that a light bulb has gone on, and they recognize those are the characteristics of kids that they do already have in their program, but they just didn't know what to call it or what it was labeled. So,
well, and that's my favorite, because that requires very little, if any, money, and it requires very little staffing. Someone with a willing heart to support one child and maybe present the lesson in slightly a different way, or just give them a little bit of extra TLC on a Sunday morning, can really be the start of a great inclusion ministry.
Absolutely.
So,
and after we identify these ways of beginning an inclusion ministry, there are lots of people in our congregations already who can be involved actively in the process. So why don't we talk about that for a minute, some of the people who might be involved.
right, well, and as we said, it's so critically important to remember that ministry cannot happen with just one person. And I think we sometimes see folks fall into that a little bit. I've got to do it all myself, but the body of Christ is so beautiful because everybody is necessary to what's happening. So what we encourage people to do is to identify some stakeholders who would really be interested in this ministry, and that can include one of the pastoral staff. It can include a parent of a child with special needs, maybe someone who's trained in special education or occupational therapy, or a doctor, maybe even an attorney who can advise on policy. One of the things that I really like that our colleague Harmony Hensley recommends is to make sure to include on that team the parent of a typically developing child, because this models for other parents in the congregation that this inclusion ministry is for everyone. It doesn't matter if you have or if you don't have a child with special needs.
Right, it's important across the board. That's absolutely true.
Absolutely right.
And an advisory team can really help, bring their areas of expertise into the church setting, which is something they don't always get to do. Every congregation has people who have worked with kids with special needs, whether it's something that they're professionally trained for or something that they're just naturally gifted for. Special ed teachers and speech and language pathologists and occupational therapists, physical therapists, and all of those types of people have a chance to work with kids in the church setting, and it gives them an opportunity that they don't always have at church, which I think is great.
Well, I also like how this can be an outreach tool for professionals in the community. Many times, folks that we have encouraged people to contact aren't necessarily churchgoers, but they have a lot to offer a ministry like this, and it really sort of opens their eyes to the neat things that are involved with belonging to a church.
Absolutely.
And so it's just an opportunity for them to use their gifts for the body of Christ.
Yeah, we even had a situation with one of our respite events at our church where we had something online that a teacher for kids with autism had found online and asked if she could volunteer. And we said, absolutely. And she said, well, kind of a disclaimer, gave us a disclaimer saying, but I'm not a Christian, I don't really go to church. And we said, well, that's okay. You know, we're a church full of sinners, and that's okay with us. And what a great witness to her to be able to come into a church where people cared so deeply and so passionately for kids with special needs, and a witness to her as well. So I love that story as well.
So as we think forward, once we have a team assembled and ready to work, it's important to sort of put some bones into this body. And policies and procedures are the structure, really, that's going to help folks to know what to do and when to do it and how to do it. You've had a lot of experience putting policies and procedures into place through respite outreaches. So talk a little bit about what that looks like.
Absolutely. We have to be really get down to the practical level, I think, of thinking about the kids that we're going to serve, whether it's in a modified vacation Bible school program, or whether it's in Sunday morning programming or midweek programming, or at a respite or outreach event. That these are kids who sometimes would be interested in things that are outside our building, so we have to think of things like entrances and exits to the building, and making sure that we have security people who are stationed there, just as a, if for nothing else than just a visual reminder that the kids need to stay within the building. It's just a practical thing to think about, that these kids may, in fact, want to be curious about things that are outdoors, and to keep them safe, we need to be aware of that ahead of time. Things we call ministry in the light, so that is never being alone with a child in any area of the church. So if you have diapering or bathroom responsibilities, or a child who doesn't do those things independently, and you need to accompany or chaperone or even completely do those tasks for the child, that you need to be able to find another person, a floater within the building who can accompany you. And just keep an eye on things and make sure, which is just an added level of protection for the child, and for the parents of the child, and for the volunteers, and for the church as well.
I've heard people say, well, these policies don't have to be so detailed. This is the church, and people should trust us. And that would be wonderful to be able to say that and know it for sure. But this is sort of where our society is right now, and I think that we need to be responsive to that by having the same high level of safety and security that our secular counterparts would offer.
Yes, and if you can imagine the trust that you would have to have on being a parent and entrusting your child who perhaps doesn't have language skills and can't adequately communicate to you in words what has happened during his or her stay in the church, that's a huge leap of faith for a parent to take. So we do have to make sure that we treat it with that level of trust that's been given to us.
I love what you say to volunteers, especially younger volunteers like our teens, about your buddy or the child that you're in charge of being an extension of you. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that we like to think of them as a part of our body. So just as you wouldn't walk across the floor without taking along all the parts of your body, that you really can't go any further than arm's length away from the kids that you're in charge of taking care of and keeping an eye on, because things can happen really quickly with all kids, typically developing, and kids with special needs. So we really need to be very responsible and just very diligent about keeping an active eye on them while they are in our care. And background check is another thing that we need to be very careful about. Every church has a different policy on background checks. Most all of them do them in some way, shape, or form. Everyone over the age of 18 should be background checked. Mostly under 18, there isn't a lot to check, but we can always provide more information at Key Ministry if people need more information about how to have that done. But we just encourage churches to go with whatever policies are in place currently for their children's ministry staff or volunteers, and then to follow a similar policy to that for inclusion ministry as well.
Right. One of the things that I always like to talk to people about, because sometimes folks will get real overzealous about policies, and some folks really like rules. I think it's always important to remember that when you first sit down with your team to design your ministry and you have your overarching vision for your ministry, that vision is inclusion of kids. And we want to make sure that all of our policies and procedures are aligned with that vision. When I was teaching full-time, I had a young man who was very, very anxious and really struggled with staying in class because he would get so nervous. And so what I noticed that as time went on, he would cope by asking to go to the restroom. And I knew that he didn't actually have to use the restroom. He just needed a break. And he would come back in 30 seconds or 45 seconds. But I had an assistant that was working for me at the time, and she was very structured and role-based, and she would say, no, he can't go. And then she made a chart so that he only had one bathroom visit in the morning and one in the afternoon. And she was pretty angry with me when I said, I'm sorry, no, you can't use that with him. He needs that opportunity to get up and move and take a break. Over time, those bathroom visits really decreased because he was feeling more and more comfortable. But we want to make sure that our policies aren't rules for rules' sake, but they really support the inclusion of the child.
Yeah, and also the team that I get to work with on some of the respite events at our own church, one of the things that we always say is we want our default setting to be yes. So if there's a kid who has a very involved medical condition, we want the default answer to be yes, we can accommodate that kid, and then make sure that we recruit volunteers based on that need, who can meet the need. But yeah, I think it's the same idea of making sure that inclusion is where we always want to err on the side of.
Remember that conversation that we had a few years ago with the ministry leaders at Access Ministry in McLean, and we were really struggling as a team of leaders on how to manage some kids who are really having a hard time being safe at church. And I remember Jim Pearson said, it is okay to say no sometimes, but then what are you going to do with that no?
Right.
And so it was a great discussion in, okay, if this setting is too difficult for the child, what can we do for the family to make sure that they are fed spiritually and that they feel like they're a body of Christ? And some great ideas came from that as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's important to remember as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for under policies and procedures, we really need to, in some ways, play the what if game. What would happen if a child were acting out and the rest of the kids in the classroom need to be moved away from him or her? What would happen if the power went out during Sunday school or vacation Bible school? And we can't ever foresee every eventuality, and at some point we have to just pray and know that God has it covered. But to some degree, I think we can, think about and foresee some of the basic things that could happen and make sure that we prevent any damage or.
Well, and that's one of, I think, the most fun things that we do in some of our workshops is we play the what if game and then have folks really come up with some scenarios for, okay, if that did happen, this is how our ministry would handle it. Giving folks an opportunity to talk about that before the program year even begins, I think can be really a safety for the ministry as a whole.
Absolutely, yes, I think so too.
So now that we have these policies and procedures in place, how do we roll out the red carpet for our guests?
Yes, and lay out that welcome mat, right? Well, we need to raise awareness within the church body, first of all, and make sure that everyone is aware of our efforts and what we want to accomplish with our programs and who we want to serve, because everyone in the congregation probably knows someone who is impacted by a disability. So whether it's a neighbor or a family member, someone who could benefit from something that's happening in the inclusion ministry.
Right, and we also want to make sure that inclusion ministry is not, I think the popular term is a silo. It's not a ministry that's happening in a vacuum, but rather it's really a whole church initiative because every family belongs to the church. So offering to open the door for someone who may be on crutches or offering to stand with other children in the family if one child is having a meltdown or is feeling nervous, can really provide someone to stand in the gap and make that family feel comfortable and welcome until everything feels right and they can come in.
I love that inclusion ministry, or the beginning of an inclusion ministry in a church, sometimes spurs the smallest changes that really are just so pervasive over the whole church and are so positive. Things like just something as small as if someone were pacing at the back of the congregation during worship services, that maybe there's a reason why that's happening, and to not think, oh my gosh, that person is really impatient, but to think maybe something's going on. And that should be okay with us if someone's at the back of the congregation. All the little things that you look at and might think is a little strange, but just to start looking at that with a little more understanding and empathy.
Right. Or families who are consistently late. We know that families whose kids are affected by anxiety or ADHD might have a really tough time getting out of the gates in the morning. And just knowing that they might be late and still having a greeter there to say, we are so glad you're here. Come on in. I'll show you where your class is, and just making it okay from the very beginning. Right,
because the welcome really does start in the parking lot.
Yes. It really does. It does. So now that we've got policies in place and the church is ready to welcome, how do we let the community know that this is available? Right.
A good word of mouth among your congregation is really the best place to start, I think. I think the community of parents who have kids with special needs is very tightly knit, and they talk among themselves quite a bit.
Do.
And so I think once you start doing a great job with one or two kids, that word will spread, and before you know it, you'll have no problem at all. Now, on the flip side of that, I don't want people to think that their doors will be knocked down by the community of parents who have kids with special needs.
But I think that's a really good point, because sometimes when we do respite training, the folks at churches will say, you know what, I don't think we're going to be able to do this, because there's no way if we have 100 kids here for a respite event that we can have 100 of them come to Mass or to church on Sunday.
Because we don't have enough volunteers.
We don't have volunteers, we don't have enough space, we don't have enough materials. And I think it's important for folks to know that there very likely will not be a stampede on Sunday morning. Yes. What has your experience been with that?
The numbers that we've seen in terms of families who will attempt a Sunday morning worship experience following having attended a respite event or an outreach event at a church is about 25 to 40% of the families within maybe 12 to 18 months following an event might try to attend a Sunday morning worship. And that is, it's pretty doable when you think about the numbers and how that actually translates into Sunday mornings. But it's something to keep in mind, because you want to get the word out, but then there are churches who are sometimes a little gun shy and say, oh, I have to be careful because we don't have that many volunteers to really support that.
One of the ways that we've encouraged folks to get ready for the eventuality that people who are affected by disabilities might visit is to recruit some, we call them floaters, so that you've got extra folks on Sunday morning who are available. They might not be needed, but they might be. So just to have a couple folks who are trained and ready and willing to jump in and help out a child who has
Yes.
disability can be a wonderful way to sort of make a seamless transition.
Yeah, and a lot of volunteers really like that post as well because they don't have to prepare and do a Sunday morning
Right.
lesson plan and, you know, have a lesson planned every day for, you know, Sunday worship. It's something on an as needed basis, and they just serve when they're really called upon to do it. So I think it's a really good position that volunteers like to do as well.
Talk a little bit about when you were helping to plan for the luau, for example, and also for some of the respite events, the business card idea.
Right. We had little, we called them outreach cards, and we just put the web address and just the name of the event and who it was intended to serve, along with an email address and a phone number to get more information. And then it's easier than having a flyer when you're out in the community to hand to people. A flyer can be a little cumbersome. And these were just little business card size, cardboard, regular cardstock. And it was a lot simpler to carry with you and to be able to hand to people to get information out about the event. So, and those are really inexpensive and easy to do on anybody's home computer as well, which makes it nice.
I love that one story about the family that came to one of our respite events, and I was chatting with the mother, and this is a family who doesn't go to church. In fact, they are a Jewish family, and so they dropped the kids off. There's 3 of them, and then they headed out for dinner, and someone at the dinner, you know, they met up with friends, and someone said, well, you know, where are your kids? Because they knew how hard it was to get sitters for this particular family because of the special needs involved. And so the mom said, oh, well, our kids are at church. And all of the friends at the table, you know, what are your kids doing at church? And she said, this is the community that's reaching out to us and meeting our needs.
And it's a powerful statement.
It's a very powerful statement.
It is.
I also love how when pickup time rolls around, parents are just loosely congregated in the atrium and sharing stories and laughing and getting to know one another and really having a good time.
And relaxed. You know, when they come in, they're rushed, they're hurried, they're stressed. And when they come back, it's like, you know, they've had a little time to relax and get some space between, you know, them and their day. And everybody's really relaxed at the end of it.
Well, and I think as people plan, remember that, you know, yes, your welcome starts in the parking lot and folks coming in, but being a good host and having a program or a ministry that works means making sure that folks can exit well, and providing that nurturing the entire time that they're with you is really, really important.
Right. It might even be nice to help some of them out to the car if they have their hands full and papers and crafts and that sort of thing. It might be a nice touch as well to just help them out to the car.
Right.
But completing our thoughts about marketing the ministry, you can do simple press releases to your local newspapers. A lot of local papers want to know the things that are happening in their places of worship. So they like to know about the key players and the kids that you're serving and that sort of thing, as well as the website for the church itself. And a lot of people find not only that they will be able to give word of mouth, you know, publicity to the event, but they also will find ways to volunteer for those events that are listed on the church website as well.
One thing that I think is important to remember in terms of marketing, having something on the website is important, but our language that we're using in our signage, in our press releases, on our website really has to be very sensitive. We worked with a church several years ago, and they were so excited about their special needs ministry, and they wanted to have a booth in the lobby that said special needs check-in here. And that really troubled me, taking off my teacher hat and putting on my mom hat. If I were the mom of a child and had to drop her off at the one place where she could be typical and blend in, that would have been really hard for me to do. But yet this team was so well-meaning. I think, though, we've got to spend a little time talking about how to make sure that our signage is inclusive.
Absolutely. And one of the churches that we've worked with uses a quiet entrance for some of its programming, which it's necessary for the kids that they serve because a lot of them are really bothered by the high noise and high light. So having an individual entrance for kids who are bothered by the noise and light is great, but we just have to be careful about what we call it.
I agree.
Why don't you tell a little bit about the schools, working with the schools and getting word of mouth out about things like events, because it can't be a real formalized relationship between the schools and the church.
No, it really can't, and rightfully so. There's got to be some boundaries there, and schools are bound to that, and I think churches understand it as well. However, when you build relationships with people, by and large, they're going to tell good news when they hear it. In fact, we had the experience of bumping into that one teacher, and she said, "What is going on at your church?" And it was great to tell her all about the respite program that's happening here at our home church. And she said, "It's all my parents can talk about," and they keep telling their friends, and they all get together and have dinner, and they're having so much fun. She said, "I've never seen anything like that before." So with that, then teachers do start giving out the information. We've had great success working with the state support team here in Ohio, in the Cleveland area, and our colleague Harmony also has been asked to serve on a county board for respite for kids with disabilities.
In the Cincinnati area.
In the Cincinnati area. So by building relationships that are positive, we really can break down those barriers very effectively. And it's been just a joy to see that kind of relationship develop.
Yeah, absolutely. And our inclusion ministry, just like any programming that we do within the church, we have to be sure that we're evaluating it on a consistent basis and making sure that it's really doing what it's intended to do and serving all that it can possibly serve. So why don't we talk for a minute about evaluating our programming and making sure that we keep tabs on it and keep improving it.
One of the things that I think it's important to do is just to go back to those goals that the team has set out from the beginning, making sure that we're still focused on inclusion, and then talking a little bit about what's going well and what we can do differently. And I think including parents' feedback, including some of the kids' feedback. What do you like about church? What would you change about church can be very, very powerful as well.
Yeah.
You've had some experiences with this.
We have done that for some of the inclusion ministry things that we do at our home church. We've done a very simple survey instrument that we asked some of the older kids, some of the young adults with special needs, and then some of their caregivers and parents and some of their volunteers as well to fill out. It was very simple, 6 questions, what do you like, what's working, what's not working, what could you use less of, what's your favorite thing, what's your least favorite thing, those kinds of questions, just to gauge sort of, is it hitting the mark, is it doing what we wanted it to do, is it effective, and ultimately, is it pointing people to Christ, is it making them feel welcome in the house of God, and are they feeling like they belong here?
Right. Shannon Dingle, who's another ministry colleague and is participating in Inclusion Fusion, always makes the point that we've got to shift from ministry to families with disabilities to ministry with, because they are just as much a part of the body as we are.
And we're missing out when they're not here.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the most successful things, I think, in terms of evaluating a program is the success journal that you have used sometimes in Sunday morning programming, and how you can keep track of some of the stories about the kids who have responded well to a certain certain thing.
Stories are so powerful, and they're really encouraging when things aren't going so well. So we do encourage churches, as we train them, to keep a success log where all of the volunteers can get at it, either to add a success story, hey, this really went well with Joe today, or Amelia memorized her first Bible verse and she said it out loud and all of the kids clapped. It was great. Those kinds of things are really important to share with each other as volunteers, also to share with the parents, because what we tell them about the child that day may be the only positive that they've heard in weeks about their child. So that's really important too. And then as we look forward to transitioning that child to the next grade or to youth group as they get older, or even to adult programming, we've got a nice record of what's going well so that we can capitalize on that and continue that child in his or her growth in Christ.
Right, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can just be a 3-ring binder or a loose leaf notebook, or whatever works. Keep it in the children's ministry office or some area that all the volunteers can get to it who need to access it.
Right. That's a great tool. Well, we hope that you have enjoyed our our presentation today on getting started in ministry, and we hope it's been helpful to you. Please know that if you need more help, if you have more questions, you are welcome to contact us. You can find our information on www.keyministry.org or at inclusionfusion.org. Thanks so much.
Thanks.